Ba'amine Rava Meir of Nachman, bottom of Pei Aleph Amid Beis. I got two comments yesterday. One was that I spoke too fast, and one was that I spoke too slow. So I don't know. Ba'amine Rava Meir of Nachman.
No, that's okay.
Tashmish Hamita LeRabbanan Inoi Nefesh Hu Dvarim Shebeino LeBeina. Bottom of Aleph Pei Aleph Amid Beis. 81b on the bottom. 2 lines from the bottom. Ba'amine Rava Nachman. So we know that according to Rabbanan, Rechitza is considered to be Inoi Nefesh. And Tashmish Hamita would be, we have to see. Rabbi Yossi says that even Rechitza is not Inoi Nefesh. Rechitza would be Beino Lebeina. And as we said yesterday, Tashmish Hamita would be Beino Lebeina as well. But even Tashmish Hamita, we said, when we said it's Beino Lebeina, that's only when it's only when she says that I am usher to get hana from you. If she says you are usher to get hana from me, he doesn't even have to be ma for that, because that's shibuda. She's mishabe to him. But if she says I'm usher to get hana, so now we have a problem, because she needs to give him hana. She needs to get hana from him, but at the same token, she made herself asur to hana. So we said yesterday that's the case where he can be made for beino lebeina. But that's according to Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, we can be made for Inoi Nefesh and Beino Lebeina. But according to Rabbi Yossi, again, the definition of Inoi Nefesh was not as clear. He said that Rechitza would fall into Beino Lebeina, Tashmish Hamita would fall into Beino Lebeina, and Inoi Nefesh would be something like Peiros Alai, like the fruits would be Asur to me. That was Rabbi Yossi. Rabbanan, we said, are much more inclusive in Inoi Nefesh, and they actually included Rechitza in Inoi Nefesh. So again, for them, Rechitza is Inoi Nefesh. For Rabbi Yossi, it's not Inoi Nefesh, but it's actually Beino Lebeina. The question is, according to Rabbanan, what is Tashmish Hamita? Is Tashmish Hamita, when she says that you're also to get tashmish from me, that's nothing. We basically ignore her words. If she says I cannot get any hana from tashmish with you, or I can't get any hana from tashmish Hamita, that's where we have a little bit of a problem, because she's mishubatim on one hand, she needs to give him tashmish Hamita. At the same token, she made herself usher to get hana. So in that case, we say that he can be meifir. But again, can he be meifir it because it's beino lebeina, or because it's considered to be inoi nefesh? According to Rabbi Yossi, it's beino lebeina. According to Rabbanan, the Gemara wants to know, is it beino lebeina, or is it inoi nefesh? What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is, if it's inoi nefesh, so then if he's matir the neder, then it's gone for him and for everybody forever. If it's only beino lebeina, and she says I'm not getting any hana from tashmish, then if he's made for it, which he's allowed to be, because beino lebeina, the problem is that if they ever get divorced or if he dies, so now that neder now comes back to her, and now she can't have tashmish. And then the question becomes, now it's the second husband's problem, because now what does he do? Once they're married, he can't be matir it. So seemingly he would have to be made for it when she's a nara miurasa, but if she's not a nara miurasa and she's an older lady, then we're going to get into the problem of she'll never be able to be made for the neder. But that's the question that the Gemara has at this point. The question the Gemara has at this point is tashmish hamita according to the Rabbanan? According to Rabbi Yossi, we know that it's beino lebeina. According to Rabbanan, is it beino lebeina, or is it in fact inoi nefesh, in which case he can be made for now and forever for everybody, or is it only beino lebeina, where he can only be made for himself, and then once he dies or he divorces her, then she's going to have a little bit of a problem.
Would you suspect somebody to come to discuss with Rabbi this problem?
I mean,
just think about it.
It's the same question. You could ask, would you discuss that it would ever happen that somebody would take a neder that she can have us or tashmish hamita? Of course. No. You could ask that about a lot of questions in the Gemara. That's the beauty of the Torah.
It is absurd.
It's a little bit of okay.
Yeah. Is she saying with? I'll
tell you this much. I didn't write it. That much I can tell you. I didn't write it, but it's the Torah, the Holy Torah. Yeah.
But Rabbi, is she saying with this husband? Or is she saying?
No, that's what we said yesterday. She's saying. What is she saying? Hanas tashmishi alai. Hanas tashmishach alai. That the tashmish of you is on me. But seemingly, if she would say that tashmish, the hana of tashmish would be asur to me as well, it would be the same thing.
That's why it could impact the second
husband. Is this shibud achiv on the man or on the woman? Because it says sherak sutavonata lo yigarak. It sounds like it's the man's thing.
She's meshubat to him as well. She's meshubat. It's both ways. It goes both ways. Okay, we got to go forward. We're running out of time. Amar le tinisua. So let's bring a proof as to whether tashmish hamita is inoi nefesh or not. So we have a Mishnah. Nitula ani min haYehudim. I am removed from the Jews. I.e., a nice way for saying I will not have relations with any Jews. I will not get any hana from any of the Jews. So what happens if she says that yafer chalko mishamashta? So he could be made for the chelak, and he could basically say you have to have shimush with you have to have tashmish with me. me, so he can be made for his chelek. But she's still going to be usher to all the Jews. What does that imply? Well, that implies what? That implies that it is what does that imply? That implies that it is not a din of inoi nefesh, it's beino lebeina. Because if it was inoi nefesh and he was made for it, so then it would be usher, then it would be mutter to everybody. But now that it's beino lebeina, so now it's still going to be netula mina yudim. She's still going to be usher to any other Jew seemingly after she's usher to any Jew now, but after she would get divorced or he would die. That shows that we're holding that it's actually beino lebeina. V'iyamar neder inoi nefesh havia ma'itei netula mina yudim. Shma mina devarim shebeino lebeina havian. So that's a proof that the Rabbanan hold that it's beino lebeina and not inoi nefesh. As the Gemara, not so fast. LeRabbanan tibay lecha. We still have the kasha whether it's inoi nefesh or not. Why? Mishum de netula ni min hayehudim Rabbi Yossi getanila. Very nice that you brought me a Mishnah that seems to say that Lamaisa, if he's made for the neder, so then she's still going to be us with everybody else after the fact, which means that it's beino lebeina. No, that's Rabbi Yossi. D'amar Rav Huna, kule pirkin Rabbi Yossi. Because as Rav Huna tells us, this entire parak, including that Mishnah, all of the Stam Mishnayos of Rabbi Yossi. Where do we know that from? Mimai, because you'll remember when we quoted the first Mishnah on Ayin Tes Samad Aleph, which went on to Ayin Tes Samad Beis. If you look at Ayin Tes Samad Beis on the top, it says Amar Rav Yossi ein elu nidre inoi nefesh. But how did we end the Mishnah? And I pointed this out the first time we said the Mishnah. We ended the Mishnah by saying Divri Rabbi Yossi. And we said, why does it have to say Divri Rabbi Yossi? It just said Amar Rabbi Yossi ein elu nidre nefesh. What does it have to end the Mishnah by saying Divri Rabbi Yossi? So the Gemara is learning when it says Divri Rabbi Yossi, it's going back and saying not only what he just said is Divri Rabbi Yossi, but all Mishnayos for the remainder of the parak are Rabbi Yossi as well. That's how the Gemara learns. Amar Avuna kule pirkin Rabbi Yossi mimai kevan diktani Rabbi Yossi Omer ein elu nidre nefesh on the top of Ayin Tes Samad Beis. Lama leisula Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah have to end by saying Raizel yafer Divri Rabbi Yossi? Shma mina mikan ve'elach Rabbi Yossi. And therefore what? Therefore, if this Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi holds that when he's Mayfair, this netula nimin hayehudim, it's considered to be beino lebeina. That's not a shock according to Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi in general has a very tough time, or he has a very strict definition of what inoi nefesh is. He doesn't even include rechitza in inoi nefesh, so he doesn't include tashmish in inoi nefesh. Of course, he's not going to include tashmish in inoi nefesh. He's going to include tashmish in beino lebeina. The problem is that that doesn't answer our question. We don't care what Rabbi Yossi holds. We already knew that Rabbi Yossi held that tashmish hamita is considered to be beino lebeina. We wanted to know what the Rabbanan hold by tashmish hamita, and you can't bring me a proof of what the Rabbanan hold by tashmish hamita from a Mishnah that's giving me the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who argue on the Rabbanan and who basically have a much looser definition, or I would say a much stricter definition of inoi nefesh. So it comes out that we don't have an answer to that question, what the Rabbanan hold by tashmish hamita, and that's why the Ranas he does many times in this parak, right to the left over there. Ule inyan halacha kevan dibayan lo ifshita naktinan lechumra ve'eno mefer mishum devarim shebeino lebeina. Since we don't have an answer to this question whether tashmish hamita is beino lebeina or whether it's inoi nefesh, we need to say that it's beino lebeina, and then we're going to run into that problem that even according to the Rabbanan, if she takes this neder, that tashmish, the hana of tashmish is asaran to me, so eina chanami, the husband can be mayfair, but if they get divorced or he goes ahead and he dies, so then at the end of the day, the neder is going to kick in, and the second husband is going to have some issues on his hands that he needs to deal with. Fine. Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Levi. Shmuel says the name of Levi. Now you have to remember, again, at this point in the Gemara, so we said that any din of inoi nefesh, right? If you remember from the Mishnah, we had all those cases of the peiros. We said that if you have a din of inoi nefesh, so then you can go ahead and you can be mayfair. But we also said in the Mishnah, in the Gemara over there, that if you have something that's inoi nefesh, but there's a way around it, so then you cannot go ahead and be mayfair. So we said in the Mishnah, if you remember, we said that, as we're going to quote here, that if you take a neder, that all of the peiros in this Medina are usher to me. So even though that's inoi nefesh at first glance, we said it's not inoi nefesh because you have the other ability to go ahead and get peiros from another place. And the only time that we would say that it's considered to be inoi nefesh is if they only have credit with one guy, and he's the only guy you can get peiros from, and she says it's also for me to get any hana from this one guy, so that's considered to be inoi nefesh because we have no way around it. So now we're going to see that Shmuel holds differently. Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Levi. Kol nedarim baal mefer leishto. A baal can be made for any neder for his wife. Chutz min, the following, except for the following: hana asi al ploni. The hana al ploni, I cannot give any hana to ploni. I can't give any hana to ploni. Of course he can't be made for, because that's not an inoi nefesh. The fact that she she can't give hana to ploni. She give hana to millions of people. Why? That's not inoy nefesh. She'eno mefer. That I understand. Aval hanaas ploni alai mefer. And this is the chiddush of Shmuel. When she says that the hana of ploni alai, I can't get any hana from that guy, so he could be made for it. So the obvious question that we're going to have is, I don't understand. If you can't get any hana from that guy, why can the Baal be made for it? You can get hana from, we're not talking about tashmish because she's married. We're talking about getting hana in general. If she can't get any hana from that guy, why is that considered to be inoy nefesh? According to Shmuel, that's considered to be inoy nefesh and he can be made for. The question we're going to ask in the Gemara is, why is that inoy nefesh? After all, if she can't get any hana from this guy, there's 1,500,000 other guys in the world to get hana from anybody else. I can't get any hana from this plumber. That's inoy nefesh, you need a plumber. No, you don't need that plumber. There's 500,000 other plumbers in the world. So that's the Gemara's question. But Shmuel says if you can't get any hana from this specific plumber, once it's one specific guy, even if there are 1,000,000 other plumbers in the world, that's considered to be inoy nefesh. Very interesting. So he's having, again, if you want to basically rank them at this point, Rabbi Yossi has, I would say, the most strict definition of inoy nefesh. Then the Rabbanan have a more encompassing definition of inoy nefesh. They include rechitza. And now it seems like Shmuel is having the most encompassing definition of inoy nefesh, that even things which have another possibility and an alternative, even things like that can be considered to be inoy nefesh. Says the Gemara, it's not. We have a kasha. Peros Medina zu alai. If you have the Medina of this, Peros of this Medina, Yavi Lami Medina Acheres. So he can't be made for it because you have Peros from another Medina. The obvious question is, according to Shmuel, who cares that I have Peros from another Medina? Lamaisa, if I can't have these Peros, that's considered to be a shvu on something specific. And he said, once I ask for something specific to me, even if there are alternatives, at the end of the day, that's considered to be inoy nefesh because I can't have these Peros from this Medina, and therefore the Baal should be made for. So why does it say that the Baal can't be made for and they need to bring her from another Medina? Amar of Yosef, Dika Amrat Shetavi, you're right. That if theoretically she would just say Peros Medina zu alai, Einachanami, he would be able to be made for, and the Mishnah would agree you could be made for because once that guy is usher, that's considered to be inoy nefesh. What does it mean Peros Medina zu alai? Why is it that he can't be made for? Because Amar of Yosef dikar Amra Shetavi, because she said that the Peros of this Medina are usher to me, the ones that you, my husband, bring to me. So what's the problem, or what's the answer? So the Gemara says, look at the Ran over there, like 10 lines down from where it gets a little bit wider. Vi amar te amar le shetavi. The Ka'amar Shetaviat, I'm sorry, where before it gets wide, on the left side over there, the Ka'amar Shetaviata, Kigon de Ka'amar Peros Mazina Zu Alayim Taviata, Avakishayaviem Acher Lo Asartam Aleh. But if somebody else would bring her these same Peros, it wouldn't be Aser. Vikevan de Yeshla Takana Be'osan Peroshal Osa Medina. Since there's a Takana with these Peros, again, if the Peros of this Medina would be Aser to her no matter what, like she said, Peros Medina Zu Alay, Einachanami, Shmuel would say, and seemingly the Mishnah, according to the way we're learning, would agree that he could be meifir because that's considered to be enough of an inoy nefesh. But if these very peros, you have a way out of these very peros, how is that? Because somebody else can bring it to her. I would venture to say she herself can go get these peros from the store, just her husband can't bring it to her. Lo dami lahanas ploni alai delasai takana lihanas meosa ploni. So you understand it's a very docustic, very small difference here. But basically what we're saying is that once she says this man is usher to me, that's inoy nefesh, and now the Baal can be made for. But if you say these peros are usher to me, that would also be inoy nefesh, because even though there are other peros in the world, these specific peros are usher. But if I say these specific peros are usher, and I give an exception to these peros, where I say these specific peros are usher, but only if you bring them to me, so then these specific peros are not totally usher to me, because there's an alternative within these peros to get them from somebody else, from not my husband or from myself. So according to that, that would be where the Baal can't be made for, when there's an exception within this specific pair. So again, before we learn today, before we have Shmuel, before we sat down today, we said if somebody says these specific pairos are usher to me, even in that case we would say that that's not inoy nefesh because there are other pairos, and therefore he can't be made for. Comes along Shmuel and says no. When you say these specific pairos are usher to me, that is inoy nefesh. You could get other pairos, but Lamaisa these specific pairos are usher, so that's inoy nefesh. So he's broadening the definition of inoy nefesh. We have a Mishnah that seems to say these specific pairos are usher to me. You can't be made for the neder. Says Shmuel, no, that's talking about a case where you say these specific pairos are usher to me if my husband brings them. But Einachanami, says Shmuel, that if the Mishnah said that if the woman said these specific pairos are usher to me, stam, so that Einachanami, the ruling would be that the husband can be made for. So that's how the Gemara answers the kasha on Shmuel from the Mishnah. Tashma pairos chenvani ze alai and yachol lahafer. You have a similar kasha In the Mishnah it says that the payros of this specific seller are usher to me, so ein yachol lahafer, you can't be mefer. But according to you, Shmuel, what? If this specific seller are usher to me, so then that should be enough of an inoy nefesh, and I should be able to be mefer it. Says the Gemara, hachanami de ka'amar shetaviata. You're right, it's a case where she said shetaviata. There's only one problem, says the Gemara. Go to the last case in the Mishnah. Lo haisa parnasaso ela mimenu hareze yafer. If the guy can only get credit from this one specific guy, so then in that case, Hareze Yafir. Then in that case, the Baal can be Mefer. Now the question is, if you say that the case is where it goes ahead and she says that you go ahead and you give, and only the payros from this specific Chenvani who gives on credit, only those payros, they're going to be also to me only Shetaviata. So then it should be the same din as the other two dinim in the Mishnah. It should be Ein Yachol Hafer, because what? Either she could go get it on credit by herself, or somebody else can bring it to her on credit. So why should the din be Hareze Yafir in the last case of the Mishnah? It must be, says the Gemara, that the Mishnah is not talking about a case of Dika Amar Shetavi. It must be that it was the way that we learned it originally, that Peiros Medina Zu Alai, or Peiros Chanvani Ze Alai, and that's all that she says, and she doesn't say Shetaviata. Once she doesn't say Shetaviata, you're back to the original question. Why is it, according to Shmuel, that Peiros Medina Zu Alai, why is it that the Baal cannot be Mefer? Why is it that Peiros Chanvani Ze Alai, that the Baal can't be Mefer? After all, it's this specific Chenvani, it's this specific Peiros from this Medina. According to you, Shmuel, once you're talking about a specific person or a specific Peiros, you should be able to be Mefer. The fact that the Mishnah says you can't be Mefer shows that that's not considered to be Inoy Nefesh, because you have another alternative of Peiros from somewhere else or another Chenvani, and we've just disproven what Shmuel said, because again, the only way we're able to understand the Mishnah with Shmuel is if she said that Shetavi Ata. But we said in the Sefer it can't be Shetavi Ata, or else why would it be Hareze Yafer? Why would he be able to be Mefer? He should be able to say, just like the other two cases in the Mishnah, that he can't be Mefer, because Lamaisa, you have a solution with these specific pairs, with this specific Chenvani, where you yourself, the woman, or somebody else gets it from this seller. Therefore, V'yamar Dekamar Shetaviata Mayafer Elami Desefa Delomaisi Bal Havi Reisha Dekamaisihi. It must be that if the Sefer is talking about where she didn't say Shetaviata, the Reisha must be talking about where she didn't say Shetaviata either, and therefore you have a kasha from Shmuel from this Mishnah on Shmuel. Says the Gemara, no. Ela Reisha and Yachol Hafer Dekamaisihi. No, you can't bring a kasha from Shmuel from this Mishnah. Why? Because really we could say that Ein Yachol Hafer. Why? Umas Nisan Rabbi Yosihi. For the same reason. You can't bring a kasha, just like you couldn't bring a kasha before from the Mishnah. You couldn't bring an answer to the Rabbanan or a proof to the Rabbanan because that Mishnah was Rabbi Yosi. So too, this Mishnah is in the same parak. Again, it's in actually that beginning of the parak. We're talking about clearly Rabbi Yosi. So very nice Rabbi Yosi says, the Amar Funa Kule Pirkin Rabbi Yosihi, Umay Ein Yachol Hafer, Mishum Inoy Nefesh Aval Mefer NEDARIM Shavena Levena. You can't bring any proofs from any Mishnayos about Rabbi Yosi. Very nice. Rabbi Yosi says, Peiros Medina Zu Alai, you can, Yavi La Medina Acheres, you can't be Mefer. Why not? Because again, his definition of Inoy Nefesh in general is so much different than anybody else's definition. So without getting into every case in the Mishnah that we just discussed, but basically once you set up this Mishnah as being Rabbi Yosi, so you can't go ahead and now say, oh, Shmuel, we have a kash on you. No, because Shmuel will say back to you, that's not what the Rabbanan hold. And the Rabbanan would actually agree to me, and the Rabbanan would say that Peiros Medina Zu Alai would not be Yavi La Medina Acheres. Peiros Medina Zu Alai would be Yachol Hafer, just like Hanas Ploni Alai would be Mefer. And so too, Peiros Chenvani Ze Alai, the din would not be in Yachol Hafer according to the Rabbanan. It would actually be Yachol Hafer, like I say, by Hanas Ploni Alai Mefer. So you can't bring a proof from Rabbi Yosef because, again, Rabbi Yosef's definition of Inoy Nefesh in general has already been different than all of our things. He's much more stricter to include something in Inoy Nefesh, and therefore I understand when it says Peiros Chanvani Ze'alai or Peiros Peiros Medina Zu'alai. I understand why you can't be made for that according to Rabbi Yossi, because at the end of the day, the Ma'aser Rabbi Yossi is much stricter. But the Rabbanan would say in a Chanami you can be made for that, and therefore they would actually support what I say. That's what Shmuel says. So that's the Gemara. And then the Gemara just points out as a side, I don't want to skip over that, but Umayin Yachal Hafer, the Gemara just points out as an aside, which is not important for our specific discussion here, but it points out as an aside that when Rabbi Yossi says in Yachal Hafer, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that even though these are not dinim of Inoy Nefesh, even he would agree that these are considered to be Beino LeBeina. That even though they're not Inoy Nefesh, they're Beino LeBeina. Why? Because Lamais, it's still annoying for the guy if he can't get it from this Chenvani. Or it's still annoying for him to have to go get the fruits from China. Yes, you have an alternative, that's why it won't be Inoy Nefesh. But Lamais, if I have to go to that store versus going to Sobeys, it's more of a schlep for for me, and it's beino lebeina. But again, we have no proof, and therefore we have this possibility now of Shmuel again to set up three different things, where you have basically again the Rabbanan having the broadest definition of Inoi Nefesh, which include Rechitza, which includes Tashmish Hamita. We have the Rabbana, we have the Rabbi Yossi, who's going to say that not as many things are included in Inoi Nefesh, and you have Shmuel somewhere in the middle, where he's saying that certain things will be Inoi Nefesh, but certain things will not be Inoi Nefesh. That's how we set up the Gemara now. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel. We're actually going to stop 2 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Torchino said he'll pick up from the Esvei on the bottom. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Nadra mishtei kikaros. If you take a neder from 2 kikaros, you take a neder, she takes a neder from 2 loaves of bread. Be'achad misaneh ve'achas ein misaneh. So I can relate to this. My daughter, seemingly, she says she doesn't like whole wheat stuff, even though I don't think really knows the difference. But she says if she sees that it's whole wheat, she says I don't want whole wheat. So let's say you take a neder not to have 2 different kikarim, 2 different loaves of bread. Let's say one of them is whole wheat and one of them is regular, and you happen to only like regular. So if you're going to ask me, is it considered to be an inoi nefesh? Is it considered to be a personal affliction when you can't have the bread? Well, it depends. The bread that's white bread, which you like, that's a personal affliction when you took the neder not to have it. But the bread that's whole wheat, which you quote unquote don't like anyway, so then that's not considered to be a personal affliction. So what do you do in this case, where you have a neder that's a personal affliction, so the baal can be meifir? If it's a neder that's not a personal affliction for her, because again she doesn't like the whole wheat bread, then it would be pashut the baal can't be meifir. The question is, what happens when she takes a neder for 2 loaves of bread? One of them is a personal affliction, one of them is not. Does the baal have the ability to be meifir the entire neder because of the bread that is a personal affliction, or do we say once there's bread in there that's not a personal affliction, he cannot be made for the neder?
But we just had a case where he can do a partial mefer, where she made the neder over all of the Jews, and he was able to mefer just.
Again, that's a specific case where he was actually mefer the neder. It just doesn't kick in totally. That was a different case. This is 2 different things. That was just a matter of he's mefer for himself, but he's not mefer for everyone else. This is a question: can you be mefer for even for himself? Can you be mefer this specific neder minei ubei? Can you be mefer quote unquote half a neder? We'll see the chiluk and the difference, but it's definitely here 1 neder, and it's a question of being mefer part of the neder. Over there, you were mefer the entire neder. You were just mefer it for some people and not for others.
We discussed earlier about this.
If you include an entire neder, that's a separate discussion.
If you break part of the neder, then everything is broken.
Right. So we're going to see the svara in the Ran in 1 second. So the Gemara says, "Mitoch shehu mefer lemisaneh." If he could be mefer, since he could be mefer for the misaneh, mefer l'she'ena misaneh, he could basically include the whole thing, and he could be mefer the entire neder. V'Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ravasi argues and says, mefer l'misaneh, v'ein mefer l'ein misaneh. He could be mefer the regular part, the regular bread, but he can't be mefer the whole wheat bread. V'ikad yamrin, there are those who explain it just as a question. Ba minei Ravasi mi Rabbi Yochanan, nidra mishteki karos ba'acha misaneh v'achas ein misaneh mahu. What's the din? Amar lei, mefer l'misaneh, v'ein mefer l'she'en misaneh. But again, at the end of the day, you have a machlokes. You have Shmuel saying you can be made for the entire neder, and Rabbi Yassi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, saying you can only be made for one of them. So let's understand the svara, and we will conclude with that. Amar Rav Yehuda, we said we know the case. Fine. And we explain, as the Ran explains, that it's a din of inoi nefesh. So now the question becomes, look at mefer l'she'ein misaneh. You can be made for that which is ein misaneh. Afapi, 7 lines down, at the end of the line. Afapi she'ein ba inoi nefesh, to cave understand, devar achila mefer l'she'ein misaneh, begrara de misaneh. You may have heard that concept before, grara. That it goes along, even though enachanami, the whole wheat bread is not misaneh, it's not inoi nefesh for her. It grara, it brings along when you go ahead and you're able to be made for the one that is inoi for you, the regular wheat. So that's considered to be bringing along the eino misaneh, the whole wheat. Uvafilu hefer stam kol aned mufar. For Rashi, Rav Yochanan mefer misaneh, because you don't have grara. So therefore, what do? You go ahead and you can be misaneh. You can only be made for one. V'nira be'enai. So let's see the next few lines in the Ran. V'nira be'enai. You see over there in the middle of the Ran. V'nira be'enai d'shmuel v'Rabbi Yochanan b'hachi pligi. About 10 lines down. Mishum dekraksiv v'isha yifirenu. The pasuk says that a husband can be made for the neder. Umafkina mehai kra lekaman ditzarech habal sheyefer kol neder. Besides what we said before, he's pointing out that this is different than what we said before. There's one din where once you go ahead, the din that you just mentioned, that if you get rid of part of it, so einachanami, you get rid of the whole thing. But umafkina mehai kra lekaman ditzarech habal sheyefer kol neder. The baal needs to be made for, when it says he shayifrenu, he needs to be made for the entire neder. The yifirenu kule mashma, because it's mashma the entire thing. Therefore, what? Vim hafer miksaso, and if he would go ahead and be made for only part of the neder, afilu mashehefer enu mufar, then even the part that he was made for would not be considered mufar. Why? Because it says isha yifirenu, you need to be made for the entire thing. Shekachi ikir agirs beishmai to lekamanu k'moshe neder lo sadishmai. Therefore, mishum hachi ke'amar. Therefore, we say dekevan shenadra mishtei kikaros hare kineder echad v'ef shalo lahafer lechatzan. The pasuk says isha yifirenu. Now you have one neder. You can't be made for half of a neder. The yifirenu ksiv mishum hachi mitoch shehu tzarech lahafer v'yachol lahafer lemisaneh mishum inoy nefesh mefer gamkin l'she'ein misaneh. Basically, you have two ways to look at it now. Look at it like this. You have the whole wheat and the regular. So you have two ways to look at it. Either we can argue and say, once I could be made for the regular, I could be made for the whole wheat as well. Or you could look at it the opposite way and say what? Since I can't be made for the whole wheat, I can't be made for the regular either. There's two ways to look at it. You can't be made for, again, you have to be made for the entire thing, we said. So now you either are going to look at it, I can be made for this, or I can be made for that. Or you could look at it, I can't be made for this, or I can't be made for that. So he says, Di Amar Lo Matzi Mefer, you can't say, I can't be made for the whole wheat, so I can't be made for the regular. Why? Sha'af Afarasa Lisana in a klum. Why? V'kevan derachmanu ya'iv le'reshusei lahafer nedarim sheyesh ben inu nefesh. Because God gave me the right to be made for nedarim that have inu nefesh. Therefore, what? Korcha mefer apesh emisanet, the misanet besh emisanet talia. V'amar lo matzi mefer ika inu nefesh. So I have a problem. Again, I have two options. Either I can't be made for the whole wheat, so I can't be made for the regular, or I could be made for the regular, and therefore I could be made for the whole wheat. But both of them need to be one and the same. And therefore he says, since God gave me permission already and says if it's inoy nefesh, you have a right to be mefer, so I definitely have a right to be mefer the regular bread part of the neder. Once it tells me isha yifirenu, once I'm doing something, I got to do the whole thing. So once I have a right to be mefer the regular part of the bread, the regular bread part, now isha yifirenu, I have a right and I have to go ahead and be mefer the entire thing. That's how Shmuel learns. What's Rabbi Yossi learn? It's always hard when you understand the svar of one. Now how do we understand the svar of the other? What does Rav Asi learn? Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan mefer lemisaneh ve'ein mefer lemash ein misaneh. Why? Why can you only be mefer the regular bread? Because he learns the nehidi yifirenu amarach mana dimashma kule velopalgi. I agree with you that when it says isha yifirenu, he needs to go ahead and be mefer the entire thing, but it doesn't mean the entire thing. It means hainu lomar shetzarech lahafer kol haneder shehu yachol lahafer. You're learning when it says isha yifirenu, you need to be mefer the entire thing, and since I have permission to be made for this part, I have permission and basically the right to be made for the entire thing. When it says isha yifirenu, he says I understand that yifirenu means the entire thing, but it doesn't mean the entire neder like you're saying. It means the entire part of the neder that can be mefered. That means if you have two parts of the neder and both of them can be mefered, where she took this type of bread and this type of bread, and she happens to like both of them, then you can't go ahead, Isha Yifirenu, and only be made for one of them and let her keep the neder for the other part, because you have the ability to be made for both parts. But over here, where one of them is not Inoy Nefesh, where I don't have the ability to be made for that part, Isha Yifirenu still teaches me as long as you're made for everything that you have the ability to be made for, then it's going to be okay. That's what Rav Asi says differently. Again, Shmuel is giving a blanket, you're made for the entire thing, therefore once you have the ability to be made for this part, you have to be made for the entire neder, even parts that are not Inoy Nefesh. And he says, no, that's not what it means. When it says Isha Yifirenu, it just means that when you're made for a neder, make sure to make for every part of that neder which you have the ability to be made for, which would be in this case the regular bread and not the whole wheat bread. And that's what he says, Yifirenu dekra Inoy Nefesh kai. Hilka kol shehefer kol ma sheyesh bo Inoy Nefesh b'hachi sagi. Once you get rid of the part that has Inoy Nefesh, i.e. the regular bread, that's considered to have accomplished and fulfilled the Isha Yifirenu. Yifirenu karina bay, umishum hachi mefer lemisaneh ve'in mefer l'she'ein misaneh. Shkoyach.